Hello, everyone. We are in part 7 of the Great Escape from Egypt. And by now, we've learned from lessons 1 through 6. If you've not watched those yet, watch those first before you continue with 7. But we've learned that we have our own pharaohs that enslave us. God meets us in our struggles. He knows our names intimately and personally. He draws us out to rescue us. He refines us in the wilderness, and he meets us within the territories of our heart to get us to walk in wholeness. Now, this week's lesson is called He Fights for Me. And before we get started, if you look in the description below this video, you can copy and paste anything you want there to follow along as we go. And then there's also a lesson at the end for you to do a little bit of homework. Now we're picking up right where we left off in Exodus chapter 3. And if you want to take some time to look that up now, you can pause the video, but we're going to go to Exodus chapter 3. Now remember, Moses was living in Midian after fleeing Egypt for killing the Egyptian. He spent 40 years in the wilderness. He was hidden and humbled and probably convinced at this point that his purpose and destiny had long passed. Then God appears to him in this burning bush moment, and he calls him to return to Egypt and lead his people out of slavery. And now we get to hear the response of Moses. So starting at verse 11, Moses asked God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God answered, "I will certainly be with you. And this will be a sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain." Now, I want to stop here and explain that Moses' reaction, "Who am I?" reveals his fear and his insecurity and really his deep sense of inadequacy. What Moses says to God is he isn't just being humble, he's wrestling literally with a broken sense of identity. I mean, let's think about the weight of his past. His life up to this point was full of contradictions. He was born a Hebrew, but he was raised an Egyptian. He tried to act as a deliverer, and he ends up killing an Egyptian, and he fails at that, and then he's led to exile. And now he's been living in obscurity for 40 years, tending sheep in the wilderness. Now, come on. I mean, who wouldn't be insecure after all that, right? So when God calls him back to Egypt, all Moses can probably think is his past failures. Who am I? It isn't just about ability. It's about shame and memory. We do the same, don't we? How could God use us when we have so many things from our past? Spiritually, many of us carry the weight of our past when God calls us forward too. Our minds replay mistakes and regrets and seasons where we feel like we know we blew it. We think our history disqualifies us, but God sees it as the soil in which humility and dependence has been truly cultivated. And when Moses says, "Who am I?" he's really saying, "God, you've got the wrong person. I don't have what it takes. I'm not enough," because he feels unqualified and unworthy. So this is one of the most common reactions when God stirs something big in us. The gap between what God asks and what we feel capable of looks enormous. But what's the point? Spiritual growth begins where self-sufficiency ends. When God calls him, he's not just sending Moses to a mission, he's restoring Moses's identity. God is saying, in essence, you don't need to define yourself by your past or by how others see you. I will define who you are through my presence. That's so encouraging for us. Don't you agree? Now, God's response says, "I will certainly be with you." And that is really both a reassurance and a revelation. It's not about who you are. It's about who I am, is what God's saying. And if you look in your Bible, starting at verse 13, Moses then asks God, if I go to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? And in verse 14, God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Verse 15, God also said to Moses, say this to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have paid close attention to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised you that I will bring you up from the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 18 says, they will listen to what you say. Then you, along with the elders of Israel, must go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Verse 19. However, I know that the king of Egypt will not allow you to go, even under force from a strong hand. But when I stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles that I will perform in it, after that he will let you go. And I will give these people such favor with the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman will ask her neighbor and any woman staying in her house for silver and gold jewelry and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, so you will plunder the Egyptians. Wow. Let's look at God's response when he said, I will certainly be with you. Now notice how when Moses said, who am I? God doesn't answer Moses's question directly. He doesn't say, you're strong enough. You've got the experience. You're a born leader. He says, what? Instead, I will certainly be with you. He made it about himself, what he is capable of. And he didn't just make it about himself. He gave him the entire outline of what he was going to do, what would happen in the mix of it, and how it was going to play out. It's as if God was saying, Moses, the answer to who am I is not found by looking inward. It's by looking upward. Your adequacy comes from my presence. And when we face our own who am I moments, whether it's in ministry or our calling or parenthood or marriage or faith, God's answer is the same. You don't have to be enough because I am enough. And I want to ask you, why does this moment in this story, why does this moment matter for our growth? It's because Moses' question is the starting point of transformation. God doesn't dismiss his fear. He meets him in it, and that's grace. In our spiritual journey, growth rarely begins with confidence. It begins with honest confession. It's like where we admit our faults and our weaknesses, and we allow God to fill the gap. I want you to think about this. God doesn't build on pride. He builds on surrender. He doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And the question, who am I? It becomes the doorway to discovering I am is within me. You see, we dissect this because like in every conversation, God shows us our own humanness within the story. And Moses was so normal in the way of responding to God, and we are too. And God didn't just respond. He told him everything he had called him to do, as if it was already finished. How would we react if we felt the nudge of God to move in our call, and then he laid it all out and he showed us exactly what we were going to do and how it was going to play out? And we'd be like, oh, heck no, I can't do all that. That sounds scary, right? It's probably a good thing that we don't have the entire picture of what God's telling us to do or what he's calling us to do, because in our humanness, we would bail before we ever got started if we knew what was really required of us to complete the call. So moving along, what did it mean when God said, "This will be a sign to you that I am the one who sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain"? Well, this will be a sign to you is another future confirmation from the Lord. Like, scripture is full of future confirmations for us. So why do we worry? God is asking Moses to trust before seeing the proof. What? Trust before seeing proof? In other words, the sign won't come before obedience. It will come after it. And that's faith. God's signs often follow obedience. It doesn't precede it. So normally when we think of signs, we expect something immediate, like a miracle to prove that God is speaking right now, right? But in this case, God gives Moses a future sign. He says, "You'll know that I sent you when this is all over, when you and the people come back here to worship me." So spiritually, this teaches us that assurance grows from obedience. Sometimes God doesn't just give instant confirmation. Instead, he calls us to walk forward in trust, and then the evidence of his hand shows up later. I know it's scary, especially when we've not had a history with God. But did you catch this? God said, when you bring the people out of Egypt, do you hear that? God is speaking in future tense. He said when, again, meaning it was already done, and it was the promise of deliverance. He doesn't say if you bring them out, but when you bring them out. That one word, when, that literally reveals God's confidence in his own plan. He doesn't need reassurance like we do. He is confident. So in our journey, we have to know the word and learn how to be confident in the one who is confident in his own plan. God's promises are not uncertain hopes. They are guaranteed outcomes when he's involved. He already sees the completion of our story. And spiritually, this shows how God speaks from the perspective of destiny, not difficulty. Even when we can only see the problem, like Moses seeing Pharaoh and the slavery and the fear, God sees the promise. He sees ahead to the freedom and the worship and the total transformation. And when he said, "You will all worship God at this mountain," he was telling Moses what the purpose of deliverance was going to be. Not just to escape Egypt, but to freely worship God at this mountain. And this is the heart of this verse. God is revealing the why behind the what. The goal isn't just freedom from Egypt. It's so that worship can be done freely. It's the same way with us. He doesn't just deliver us. When God delivers us from sin or fear or addiction or anything that holds us captive, his goal isn't just to remove our pain. It's to draw us closer to him. If God only set us free so that we could just go and live however we want, that would just be escape. But when God sets us free so that we can love him more and worship him and live in relationship with him freer, that's redemption. The mountain connection with Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai is, I have a hard time saying that, is powerful because it shows how God works. He starts with one person who's willing to listen and obey. Then he uses that person to lead many others into his presence. And his private yes to God leads to public worship for an entire people. And that's my story in a nutshell. I want people to experience God's absolute faithfulness like I have. And I will go to my grave leading people into that corporate understanding of God. I just want to make him famous. He's already famous, but through my life, I want to make him famous. I want people to know him. Moving along to chapter 4, Moses answered, "What if they won't believe me and will not obey me, but say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" So Moses is still hesitating, right? His fear shifts from who am I to what if they don't believe me? He's afraid that others will reject his calling. And he's afraid that they're going to doubt his encounter with God. Does this not sound like how we respond? Like we are so insecure. It's a mirror, literally, of our own fears. And even when we know what God has told us to do, to start something or to speak up or to serve in a new way or to lead differently or trust him deeper, or our next thought is often, what if no one believes me? Or what if people don't see what God showed me? Or what if I fail in front of others, right? So spiritually, this is the fear of rejection and doubt. We often question whether God's call on our lives will be recognized by others. But God isn't asking for everyone else's validation. He's asking for our obedience. He doesn't just want us to plant the seed. He plans to water it, and then the end result is up to him. And here we see God's answers. He answers Moses not with arguments, but with evidence of his power, showing that proof will come through obedience. Verse 2, the Lord asked him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. Check this out. I think it's so amazing that God uses his shepherd's staff. It was something ordinary in of itself. That stick represented Moses's daily work. He had been using this to shepherd those sheep, right? It was his identity as a shepherd, and perhaps the simple and quiet life he thought he would live forever. Then verse 3, God says, "Throw the staff on the ground." So Moses threw it on the ground, and what happens? It becomes a snake, and he ran from it. Now, what could this possibly mean spiritually for us? Well, God often begins his work with what's already in our hands. The problem at hand, the issue we carry, the identity we've built in things. He starts with what's already in our hands. This could be our talents or our resources or our experiences or the positions we already have, right? We tend to think we need something new or special for God to use us. But he often uses the ordinary, the staff, what we're carrying in the present, to reveal his extraordinary power. The act of throwing it down symbolizes surrender. I can't do it anymore. It's yours. Just show me what I am to do while you work. And Moses had to let go of what was familiar and safe to see God transform it. Let me say that again, but with us in mind. We have to let go of what is familiar, and we have to let God transform it. I believe that spiritually, God is saying to us, if you'll surrender what's in your hand, your controls, your plans, your talents, your worries, your issues, I can transform it into something powerful. Verse 4, the Lord told Moses, "Stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail." So he stretches out his hand and he caught it, and it became a staff in his hand again. When Moses picked the staff back up, it was no longer just a stick. I bet he never looked at that piece of wood the same way again. And think about what he does with it later. That staff was now a symbol of God's authority and his presence. So it has us asking ourselves, like, what's in our hand that God might want us to surrender? Is it a skill or a gift or a story, or what about a struggle? Are we willing to throw it down? Are we willing to surrender it so that when we pick it back up, he can show his power through it? Verse 5 goes on to say, this will take place so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. But God didn't stop there. He really wanted to prove to Moses that he could trust him. So in verse 6, it says, in addition, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. So he put his hand inside his cloak. And when he took it out, his hand was diseased, resembling snow. So it must have been like leprosy. And then now he said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak. And when he took it out, it had again become like the rest of his skin. If they will not believe you and they will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the second sign with the hand. This was yet another miraculous sign showing God's control over sickness and purity and restoration. And it reminded Moses that God's power can bring healing where there's brokenness. I believe that the hand represents what we do. It's our actions, all of our works and the parts of us that touch the world. And by placing his hand close to his heart inside his cloak, Moses' hand becomes diseased. We bring everything into our heart, and it exposes our heart in this matter, symbolizing how sin and fear, when hidden inside of us, can corrupt what we do. But when we bring the hand back in, brought back into God's presence and obedience, we find healing. And what we do in our heart, the work we do in our heart, is what we then give to others. Sometimes God allows us to see our own weakness so we can recognize our need for his healing. When we expose what's inside, our pain, our sin, our insecurity, he can restore it, and then we serve others out of that. And God wants to purify not just what's in our hand, what we do, but what's in our heart, who we are. Then verse 9 goes on to say, and if they don't believe even though these two signs or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. So what does this mean? What was it with the water from the Nile becoming blood? Well, remember, the Nile was Egypt's life source. It was the symbol of power and fertility and even Egypt's gods. They worshiped the Nile. So God told Moses that if the people still won't believe you, after throwing the staff down and the magic trick with the hand, he would show his authority over Egypt itself by turning its very symbol of life, the Nile River, into a symbol of death and judgment by turning it into blood. And spiritually, this reveals that God can turn the things we depend on most into reminders of his power too. He has no problem confronting our false sources of life too, right? So I want you to think about it. He brings to our attention the things we idolize or rely on apart from him. He has no problem confronting what we idolize to show that only he is the true source of life. And this is what he was proving by turning the water of the Nile into blood. He was basically saying, if they are going to worship the Nile, if they're going to call it their source of life, their God of power and fertility, then I'll show them who really has the power over life and death. It's such a convicting message. This wasn't just a random miracle. This was him making a very bold statement. The Egyptians viewed the Nile as a god, and God will compete with no one. Verse 10 goes on to say, but Moses replied to the Lord, Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently, or since you have been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish. And now we see another insecurity in Moses coming up, right? First it was, who am I? And then it was, what if they don't believe me? And now he's saying, I'm not good with words. I can't speak well. I'll fail convincing people. So there was a lot of insecurities coming up in Moses. So we can't feel bad when we struggle with feeling like we're useless or usable by God, because here we see that one of the greatest leaders of all times, he struggled too. He's aware of his own limitations and fears, and he openly admitted it in the presence of God, his failure in the mission God had given him. Moses was terrified of speaking publicly, especially to Pharaoh, who was the most powerful man in Egypt. I mean, can you imagine the amount of intimidation? But think about this. God often calls the least likely candidates. Those are actually the ones he prefers to use. Moses' sluggish tongue didn't stop God. God doesn't always call the most talented or the confident or the eloquent people. He calls those who are willing to trust him. And understand this, our weaknesses doesn't disqualify us. God uses them to display his strength. He says in 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That scripture alone is just like what he did with Moses when he said, I will certainly be with you. And it made me think of a very deep, dark time in my life where I was laying on an air mattress and I was suicidal, and I felt and heard a presence come into the room. I thought it was my husband. I had my eyes closed, and God leaned down on the mattress. I felt the mattress move, and I felt lips. I might have shared this in a previous video, but I felt lips come up against my ear, and I heard, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. And it shook me, and I opened my eyes and nobody was there. I thought of that. I thought that this is the same God that spoke to Moses, and it changed my life. When God came in and knelt down and audibly spoke into my ear, it was that he said, my grace is sufficient for you. He was saying, I will certainly be with you. Oh, and he was, and he is. Fear and insecurity are actually really normal. Like Moses, we often focus on our limitations. You will hear us say things like, I'm not smart enough, or I don't have the right words, or I'm too shy, or I'm inexperienced, right? What are some other things we say? Maybe you've got some things of your own that you find yourself saying. But just remember, I am is inside of you. God meets our fear with his presence and provision, and Moses is about to learn that God will provide a helper. It's Aaron, and he will give him the words to speak. So he won't be able to use his inability to speak as an excuse anymore. God set all that up in advance. Wow. In that moment with Moses, it's as if God is saying, I already knew your fears, and I already made a way. It's comforting to realize that God not only calls us, but he also equips us, often in ways we can't see yet. Aaron's rule shows that God's plans are never hindered by our limitations. He weaves others into the story to accomplish his purpose too. It's mind-blowing. It really is. And this is why I love breaking this all down so that we can understand it better, because it helps. It helps to make things more relatable for us in our journey today. Moses was so honest about his struggles, and God didn't criticize him. He worked with him. God doesn't demand perfection. He just asks for our obedience and willingness to do his work. And when we step into our calling, he equips us, even if we feel inadequate. And he already prepared for all of our insecurities to be met with helpers and others to give us a hand. Then verses 11 through 17, here God is calling him out on diminishing himself because of his speech impediment. Verse 11, the Lord said to him, "Who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say." Moses said, "Please, Lord, send someone else." Here's his last-ditch effort to get the heck out of there. It's almost laughable, but yet we can all relate, right? Then verse 14 goes on to say, "Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, 'Isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he is on his way now to meet you, by the way. He will rejoice when he sees you. You will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both of you and him to speak, and will teach you both what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will serve as a mouth for you, and you will serve as God to him. And take this staff in your hand so that you will perform the signs with." I love that. He handed him the staff again, as if to say, I've given you the authority. Now stop making excuses. So when God says, "Who made a human mouth? Who makes people mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Isn't it me?" Essentially, God was saying, Moses, I am the creator. I give abilities. I can overcome limitations, and your fear of speaking is not a problem with me. And here we have Moses, number 4 insecurity pop up. "Please, Lord, send someone else." He was still feeling inadequate, and he wanted to avoid the task. And we don't usually just give in, now do we? We're usually kicking and screaming before we finally buckle up and go, "Uncle, I give, I surrender, okay, I'll do it." Eventually, God got angry with Moses' reluctance. And why? Because he is sovereign, and he's loyal, and he's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ever ask or think. And he had already told him everything he was going to do and how he was going to provide. So why is he still doubting me, right? And eventually he gets angered because our inadequacies pale in power and comparison to his power. And I am just sure that he gets frustrated and offended by how we diminish his power with our lame excuses. Honestly, it's the absence of the fear of the Lord. And when we are full of excuses, what we are setting up on the throne of our heart is self-importance. And sometimes we set ourselves up as an idol, but God is patient. He might get offended by our inability to see our junk as greater than his call on our lives, but he never abandons us, and he never abandoned Moses. He immediately gave him Aaron. Matter of fact, he had that helper set up ahead of time. We are not meant to do everything alone. There's partnerships and support systems that God has set in place as part of his design. And like this, Moses was the person with the vision or the authority, and Aaron had the skills to communicate it. You see, it's okay to ask for help. This encourages us to accept help or mentorship and the partnership to do God's work. We were never meant to walk it alone. And it kind of made me chuckle. Even after all the insecurities stated and Moses still hesitated, God's call was clear. He said, "Now go." I can see that. That's how we do with our children, right? Okay, enough excuses. Now go. So Moses returned to Egypt. Verse 18, it says, he went back to his father-in-law Jethro, and he said to him, "Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt and see if they are still living." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." It's easy to overlook, but that quiet conversation with Jethro shows a lot about Moses's character and God's order. Moses didn't just take off. He showed respect, and he sought permission from Jethro. And he showed honor to the man who had given him shelter and family and work for over 40 years. And Jethro's words, "Go in peace," affirmed Moses' decision. It's like that gentle confirmation that God's timing and plans are right. And sometimes we just need confirmation. This was the turning point for Moses. This was the moment that he left the wilderness of Midian and began the journey back to Egypt, not as a fugitive this time, but as a man sent by God. And sometimes that's what happens to us. God uses our predicament to lead our hearts into a wilderness season. And it becomes a place of refining, of quiet, of deep work that only He can do. And when the work is finished, and when our hearts have been changed and healed, then He'll send us back to the very arena that once broke us, not to relive the pain, but to redeem it. Because now we go back different. We go back strengthened and anointed and aware that it was never about our strength to begin with. The wilderness that once felt like a setback becomes the place where God shaped us for His purposes. So do we see how that plays out in our own lives? The places where we've been broken, how God could so easily call us to go back into that same arena to minister to others. It happens all the time. I say it all the time, but it's true. The platform or the depth of our pain becomes the platform for our ministry. And verse 19 and 20 said that the Lord told Moses that when he returned to Egypt, he would find that all of the men who wanted to kill him are now dead. He even took care of that. So Moses took his wife and his sons and he put them on a donkey and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took God's staff in his hand. Notice that it doesn't say he took his staff. It specifically says he took the staff of God in his hand. I love God's assurance of safety here, don't you? God told Moses that when he returns, all of the men who sought to kill him are already dead. This is significant because Moses knew that he would be stepping into a dangerous situation, and God lovingly reassured him that the threat was gone. And that's what happens to us too. Like God often sends us back, like I said, into the places that once broke us, but we don't go back the same. The wilderness changes us, and it's in that hidden place that God fights battles we never even saw. We were in a season of struggle, and He was already taking down the strongholds that once threatened to destroy us. He went before us. He was already silencing the voices of fear and shame and defeat. It's as if He took the heads of our enemies and declared, "This is your victory." So when we return, we don't come back trembling. We come back standing. We come back with authority over the very things that God used to empower us. What once broke us no longer has the same hold because God already won. The battle, well, He already won it while we were in the wilderness. All we had to do was trust Him and praise Him and let Him work. And that staff was now a symbol of God's authority and the power that will accompany Him on the mission. So what can we learn from this? Well, God calls us out of our comfort zones. Think about this. Moses went to Midian as a way of escape, and he had been living in Midian for 40 years. And I'm sure that he felt so peaceful, and I'm sure it felt so safe there. So returning to Egypt meant that he now had to leave his comfort zone, and he had to leave the safety all the safety he had known all those years to embrace God's calling. Our spiritual growth often requires us leaving what feels safe to step into God's plan. And God's call may feel risky. It may feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable, right? But He equips us and He goes before us. Moses could have hesitated and doubted or made more excuses at this point, but instead, he obeyed God and he took practical steps. He talked to his beloved father-in-law, Jethro. He got his blessings, grabbed his family. He picked up God's staff, his scepter of authority, and he prepared for the journey. And with God's reassurance that those who sought to kill him are now dead, this illustrates God's protection over those He calls. And He provides the same level of protection for us. So today, we saw how God called Moses to do something bigger than himself, even though Moses felt afraid and inadequate. And the key lessons that we can apply to our lives through this story are as follows. God calls the unlikely and equips the willing. Our weakness, are opportunities for God's strength to shine. Obedience, even when scary, leads to God's work being done. And God often provides help and tools and protection along the way. Just like Moses' staff, God can take what seems ordinary in our lives and use it for extraordinary purposes. So I want to take this time to encourage you. I've got a song. I'm going to put the link down below, and it's Oceans. You've probably heard it before. But as you listen, I want you to think about how you can focus on trusting God in the unknown while you listen. He's asking us to also step out in faith and rely on his strength, just like Moses, and he's working behind the scenes always. I know that most of you have probably also heard the song Defender by Rita Springer, but I'm going to put that link in here as well. So in the description below, you not only have the notes to follow along as we did this study, you also have the homework and you have the music links. I am so blessed to be walking with you on this journey. I've already been getting some feedback from people who have said it's really been loaded for them. Like they're getting something out of it. They're applying it to their lives and they're realizing a lot about their own heart. And that's my goal. I want to disciple and train and raise you up so that you can do all that God's called you to do. And you might feel fearful, but that's okay, because everything he's called us to do is on the other side of our fear. So I bless you and I thank you, and we'll see you back here on the next part, which is part 8. See you soon.